The word Tlingit, which means people in their native language, is used to distinguish a human being from an animal. Tlingits believe there is little difference between humans and animals. Before European contact, the Tlingit tribes numbered around 15 to 18,000. They lived across the Pacific Northwest coast, which is the South Alaskan coastline, British Columbia, and Yukon, Canada. They also occupy mainland Alaska on a range of mountains, 50 to 100 miles inland. The northern portion of their occupancy is in Fairweather or St. Elias Mountains, overlooking Gulf of Alaska. Tlingits inhabited this area around 11,000 years ago. Oral tradition holds that the Tlingit people came from the head of the river Nazagiyel, which means raven, from the head of the Nass River, which brought light, stars, and the moon to the world. The Tlingit language has no linguistic relationship to any other language. Men and women have different roles in the tribe, which are both very important in sustaining the tribe. A woman's role is typically to gather plants and herbs, care for children, and to cook. The Tlingits trace their family's lineage from mother's name/side, and one's identity is established through the mother's clan, as Yeel or Chak. Men are the fishermen, the hunters, and sometimes they go to war when it is necessary. Both men and women participate in storytelling, artwork, music, and traditional medicine, such as shaman. Their diet consists of Pacific salmon, halibut, herring, seal, sea mammals, deer, mountain goats, and birds. Tlingit values do not permit waste. They use every bit of the land and animals that they take.
Tlingit people lived in cedar plank houses with bark roofs, typically near the sea. The houses were large, up to 100 feet long, each with around 50 people residing in each. The houses typically contain one or few families with their laborers or slaves. They are large rectangle shape with large cedar planks set upon the sides. Inside, the floors are dug down to essentially create levels. They use tall cedar trees to build houses. In 1741, the Kamacha Russian expedition was started under the control of the explorer named Vitus Bering. Bering was a very skilled sailor and fighter from a young age. He was trained on Dutch and Danish ships. Before his trip where he came in contact with the Tlingits, he took 3 voyages and was then appointed to take command of the Kamacha expedition. He was extremely interested in enlarging the Russian lucrative fur trade. The underlying purpose of the expedition was to see if the continental Americas were joined. The first contact between the Russians and the Tlingits was when the Tlingits lured 2 boats filled with 10 men on the Kamacha expedition into their village and murdered them. Later, the Russians found sea otters, which were valuable in the Chinese market, so their new goal was to take control of the water trade routes. In 1788, the Russians made contact with the Ligar. The Tlingit leader gave him a Russian copper crest coin with a picture of their heir to the throne. In 1790, the Russians had established a regular presence in the Tlingit area. In 1793, Tlingits attacked the Russians and their leader, Baron Baranov, with spears, lances, bows, and daggers, while wearing elaborate headdresses and giant wooden planks for armor. The power of the Russians' guns made the Tlingit flee from battle. 12 Tlingits and 11 Russians were murdered during this battle. In 1796, the Russian leader Baron Baranov established a colony with around 80 people in Yakutat Bay. The chiefs made frequent friendly visits to Yakutat with gifts and even let some children live in the Russian colony.
In 1799, Alexander Baranov and his Russian followers established a trading post in current-day Sitka, which was then Tlingit territory. The Russians forced the Tlingit people to supply them with food to trade and to eat for themselves, such as potatoes, mountain sheep, and halibut. This same year, the Russian-American Company, or commonly known as the RAC, was formed as a quasi-governmental monopoly for Russians to control the fur trade and the power to establish settlements in Alaska. In 1802, 600 Tlingit men attacked Baranov's island in Sitka and Yakutat Bay. The Tlingits accused the Russians of robbing them of their fur skins and land. In 1804, the Battle of Sitka began between the Russians and the Tlingits. The Russians owned Alaska at this point in time, according to the RAC. The Russian attack was in response to a Tlingit attack on a Russian fort 2 years earlier. Russians returned to Sitka to reassert their dominance by destroying 2 Tlingit villages. They also destroyed a Tlingit fort in Nova Arkhangelsk. The Russians used cannons on their ships to defeat their enemy. Eventually, the Tlingit people begged for peace and moved to the other side of the island. The Russians came out of the Battle of Sitka as the winner. In 1806, the Tlingits planned to attack Russians in Sitka, but the Russian leaders found out about this planned attack. Therefore, the Russians invited the Tlingits' chief over for a grand feast and gave them gifts. The Tlingits called off the attack and claimed the Russians as their friend.
In 1822, the RAC permitted Russians to conscript half of the adult native male population between ages 18 to 50 years old to work up to 3 years hunting sea otters for Russian trade. The form of slavery angered and weakened the Tlingit people. Potlatches are a traditional Tlingit celebration performed out of respect of the dead, a wedding, the birth of a child, the giving of a name, or a funeral. They typically last around 4 days long, and they consist of dances, songs, and gifts. There is also a feast hosted by one family for another during the grand celebration. The entirety of the celebration increases the host's social status.
Important and culturally fundamental traditional gatherings such as potlatches became almost non-existent during the tuberculosis epidemic in 1836. Around the same time, Americans came to Tlingit country for gold and tried to occupy land which spread diseases. Because of contact with Europeans, diseases were brought over that included smallpox and influenza, killing almost half the Tlingit population, whereas vaccinated Russians only lost 1 man in the epidemic. The Tlingits believed that that worsening physical condition was caused by spiritual disturbance. A shaman is a Tlingit healer. The epidemic caused many Tlingit people to lose faith in their shamans and become closer and more dependent on the Russians. Many Tlingit people during the epidemic turned to Russian churches for relief, and during this process, they were given new Russian names, which is against the Tlingit beliefs. Due to this extreme cultural transition, the Russian Orthodox and Presbyterian faiths are now well established in the Tlingit society.
The Russians remained in Tlingit territory until 1867, which is when they sold Alaska and their tenuous title to the United States. The Treaty of Cession was formed by the U.S., which referred to indigenous people of Alaska as uncivilized tribes and subject them to the same regulations as Native Americans in the United States. The Tlingits were not allowed in town, therefore they watched this transaction from their canoes. The Tlingits used dugout canoes to get around, and they were made from spruce and cedar logs. Tlingits traveled by canoes distances of up to 1,000 miles to obtain goods from other tribes. At the closing of the frontier, the population of the Tlingit people ranged from 150 to 500 in the Yakutat villages.